Hi, I'm Gerald Ratnam at Wisma Bernama in Kuala Lumpur. This is the Nation ASEAN Plus on Bernama TV. Now, across ASEAN, power is often centralized, respect is equated with silence, and leadership can become lonely at the top. From Indonesia to Vietnam, Malaysia to Thailand, the power distance index plays out in boardrooms, ministries, startups, and regional organizations. Today we explore how ASEAN's deep-rooted cultural hierarchies shape decision-making, innovation, and trust, and what it will take for leaders to shift from control to collaboration. Joining me on the program is Maresa Ng, CEO and Program Director of the Spark Group Asia. Maresa, it's good to have you back in the studios here at Bernama, and it's a very exciting topic that you've brought to us. Thank you very much for doing that. But let's start with this, the power gap in ASEAN countries now. Where I'd like to begin is, how does the power distance index help us get a sense of how leadership works within ASEAN?
I think one in which the power distance index by Dr. Hofstede was a study that was done a long time ago, but it's not spoken of enough. But the power distance index talks about the acceptance of unequal power and authority. That means if you're you're older, you have more experience, more wealth. The power distance means that people are more likely to accept an unequal distribution of that power. So if the power distance index from Dr. Hofstede's study, if the power distance index is wide, it's huge, it means that if you're in a position of power, you're the boss, you're the CEO, or you're the senior manager, senior director, it is assumed that there would be an accepted treatment toward being in that position. Whereas if your power distance index is lower, and for some countries is lower, it means that there is equal sharing of that power, and how the boss is, the leader is, there is an equal distribution across the entire organization, whether it's traditional corporations, startups, tech firms, government agencies, across the board, it is narrower. Yeah. So the flatter the organization, it means that also the leaders are more approachable. They're more approachable. You can reach out. It's a flatter organization. You have ideas. You have different perspectives. You can sound that out. But the bigger the PDI, it means that your leader is further away from listening to you, or having a real picture of what is happening on the ground.
Right. Just for the benefit of the viewer, PDI is an acronym for Power Distance Index. It's not an STD. Well, speaking of which country scores the highest? I mean, out of curiosity.
Well, that's where Malaysia is number one.
Malaysia boleh.
Malaysia boleh.
Okay.
So right up there with the top scorers are Malaysia, Indonesia, Mexico, China, Singapore. And on the bottom percentile, you get Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany. You get some of these. And if you look at some of these differences, of course, these are nation index. Within the nation, you'll have different applications to how this hierarchy works. But if you look at ASEAN countries, yeah, Vietnam's not on the list though. We've got to talk about
right,
that. Yeah,
right.
Vietnam's
so
not on the
Vietnam
list.
is not on the list.
No.
Very interesting. It gets interesting.
Yes.
We'll get to that. But going back to what you're saying.
Yeah. So when you look at these countries, they operate differently from whether you're a smaller company or a government corporation. But PDI does exist in organizational hierarchy with whether people speak up. And that is something that holds back quite a bit of, that's a leadership question.
Right.
On how people engage.
So, but why is it different with Vietnam? And coming back to these countries who share the same problem in Southeast Asia and ASEAN,
yeah.
Do they all have the same issues that lead up to this?
They do. They do. Okay. There is a perspective to why ASEAN countries have this, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But in many different shapes and forms, a leader or a boss or a manager could ask a question. And the employee will be like, okay, I'm fearful. Where's this question coming from? If I answer, do I answer what I think, I really think, or do I answer what my boss wants me to say? There are all of those nuances that are happening in different levels based on power distance. And this inability to speak up or the not willingness, sometimes it comes from the response. If I say something or I bring a problem that's happening on the ground, will I be embarrassed? Will I be ridiculed? Or the boss might say, yeah, I've done that before, or I've heard of that before, doesn't matter, shrug it off. So some of these as nuances hold a lot of what employees or the team at large know about what's happening on the ground, bring it up. And that creates that divide. And so when I'm a leader at the top of an organization, I say, well, I practice open door policy. So if there's any problem, my door is always open, so my employees should be able to reach out to me. But some of what's happening is open door policy is not necessarily working. Why? My door can be wide open, but are people coming through? Or if they come through, do they have time of day with the leader, with the manager, or I'm busy, or there's a certain shrug, you know?
So does this happen across both sectors, public and private?
Different. So if I'm a public organization and I've been around for a long time, obviously some of the machinery has been around. Machinery meaning the systemic SOPs, policies, has been around for a long time. And some people have been there for like 20, 25 years. I just spoke to a government infrastructure business and they maintain some of our rails and they've been around, some of the technicians in there have been around for 25 years. So they are of a mindset, if it has worked for the last 25 years, why do we change it? And so when the younger technicians, younger generations want to come in and they say, no, the system needs to be upgraded, we're having this problem, we're having that problem, but that has worked for us. What worked for the last 2.5 decades may not work in the next decade or so. And that's the challenge that a lot of the younger generation are having. And get this, some of these government machineries that have been around for a very long time, some of these technicians or senior engineers have been around for right up to 5 years left to retirement, and they're going, damn, we have a problem. There's no one to succeed what we do. And so when you talk about how these happen at different levels, if you're a government agency or you're a larger corporation, a manufacturing concern, or you're a startup, a tech firm, your attitude toward these perspectives that come from your team can be very different. And I would testify to say that at times it has to do a lot with globalization. It has to do a lot with the information that comes.
I want to digress a little, but where does Singapore sit in all this? And we're talking about the power distance index. Apparently Malaysia tops the list, but we'll get to Malaysia later. Where does Singapore sit in all this?
Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, out of that list, probably about 70. So not too bad. Not too bad. Mm-hmm. Not as high as Malaysia. But Singapore is also high on the list in terms of power distance. But see, Singapore is an economy that's very globalized. A lot of people come from everywhere to go and work in Singapore. So you've got mixed cultures. And when you have mixed cultures, you've got the Danish, the Germans, the Americans all coming down. You almost have that good mix, and everybody has to kind of understand each other. You see how that's threatening ASEAN countries is that you now have multiple generations. You've got your 60s, your 50s, your 40s, your 30s, and they all are generations that behave very differently. From the 50s and 60s that were using floppy drives, right down to your digital native that, I don't know what's a floppy drive. I don't know how to log in and listen to that squeaky sound on the internet. That multiple generation within a local nation is forcing companies to say, hey, I think I have a power distance problem. But Singapore has less of that because of the mixed culture. Everybody comes from everywhere to work in a hub.
So why do you think this is happening here in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN countries? Why is it still common? Why is the boss is always right mindset still a big thing here?
It's changing, Gerard. The one thing is it's changing.
So which means to say captains of industry, people who are in ministerial positions understand what's happening. They see this dynamic playing out and they say, we want to make change. Is that happening?
I think it's, I'm not sure about the government machinery. Of course, slowly over time, they are realizing that, hey, you know, I do need to listen to what's on the ground. But if you ask me, it's slowly changing. But what plagued us before, some perspectives say, is the feudal systems, colonial influences that in many parts of ASEAN, we had Malaysia, of course. We were colonized.
So there's two sides to this argument. Some say it's fear, some say it's loyalty.
Yeah.
What do you think it is?
Well, sometimes it's loyalty. Like, for example, Vietnam. There's a very strong loyalty with collectivism. So if the group says yes, it's generally yes. Even though you might think differently from the group, but because everybody says yes, okay lah, I will say yes to. Or you say A, okay, we'll go with A. So that collectivism. So loyalty is displayed in many different ways. Malaysia, for example, there's still a respect for age, wealth, experience, seniority. So if you're in a higher level, you're in a higher managerial level, okay, I will listen to you, I will hear you out, but I may disagree. But the disagreement is not immediate. That's respect. And that, for me, is something that holds a lot of real discussion, confrontation from happening, innovation from happening. If you look at some of the countries that are lower in power distance, there's a lot of innovation. Swedish ideas, different businesses that come from there. The innovation is different for companies, for countries that have a bigger gap in terms of the power distance.
So if we back up a little and if we look at a hierarchy,
yeah.
where in that chain is it harder to speak up?
Oh.
Do we have an idea? Is it where middle management is, or does it cascade upwards?
Okay. You know, I've been for a different interview on mid-managers. Yeah. I would say that as the mid-manager, in the middle, let's start with in the middle, it's harder because they're feeling the pressure from the top to perform results, outcomes. And then they are not getting the real issues from the bottom. So your middle managers are sandwiched. So if you ask me where the challenges are happening and the most pressure point is probably the middle managers, not the top. The top are just at the top of that pyramid, just going, hey, how come I'm not getting real information? What's going on? Knock, knock. They go to the middle managers. The managers say, oh yeah, I don't have a clear view as well. Why don't I go and check it out? So the information must come from the bottom. You ask with where the power conundrum lies. Very honestly, if all this were to change, everyone owns the power conundrum. Because a lot of managers in the senior position will say, I ask my employees, I ask them, but they don't speak up. They don't say anything to me, so they're quiet. So what do? I talk more. I don't want the awkward silence, so I instruct and I direct more because I don't get input.
Right.
That's what they say. But if we were to change this power conundrum, Gerald, it really has to begin with the top to hold a space safe enough so that people can speak up. And when they've spoken up, not all ideas are great. You know, it's not all like, wow, that's amazing. Not all the time. But they need to be heard. And that's how a lot of the, perhaps senior leaders struggle with that. They will direct and instruct more. And that's challenging for the team. So, I'm not heard. I might as well just shut up.
Right.
Yeah.
So within Kuala Lumpur, when you speak to people, let's say within the private sector, do you see flatter hierarchies now, that there's a semblance of an awareness moving about within urban parts of Malaysia with regards to running an establishment or a company or a startup?
I do. I see it more in startups. You might say, well, actually, startup easy what? The company is small, so the CEO is very accessible, the founder is very accessible. You might say that. But we have a lot of huge startups, and they can be like 200 to 300 people, the size of huge manufacturing companies, but they are so flat. When I say flat, the co-founders are mingling among the team, they can sit down, they have a lunch, and they have real conversations, as opposed with large manufacturing companies that operate very traditionally, where, hey, if you want an appointment with the CEO, please make an appointment with the PA, talk to the person. There are so many gatekeepers among each and every senior leader that it's hard for people to approach them. So if you ask me, it happens at different levels, but they are happening.
Right. So if ASEAN keeps at this, will it lose out moving forward?
Oh yeah, big time.
How?
Big time. Okay. First, we must ask why this is all becoming crucially important now, and it was never as important, let's say 20 to 30 years ago, let's say even 10 years ago prior to COVID. It's more important and getting crucial because of globalization. We all know, and you see, because of COVID, people are so remote. I met a company, that's Unilever. Okay, so I met with the CEO. 1 month a year, you can choose any country to work from. That means if you're based in India, you can go and pick Mexico, you can pick Spain. They are offering remote benefits. You manage the time zone, and as long as you can get your work done, okay, done. So we are realizing that we have global employees and remote teams. We're outsourcing services everywhere. So we work with India, we work with Philippines. Now, because of this globalization, it has sped up during COVID. And because of that speed, if we don't reduce that power distance, we don't reduce that, we're not listening to changes that can happen almost very quickly. I mean, we know how the changes happen. Sometimes it takes weeks to months to materialize something. But now it can happen overnight, almost so quickly. How do companies respond to that change? So if I may, it is becoming critical and crucial that a lot of companies that don't adopt this consultative approach with their team, they are losing out on really important input that sometimes the team has, but they're not bringing it up. They're fearful. Like if I bring this bit of bad news, I bring this customer is about to leave, not happy with a certain standard, I might lose my job. That fear, that is what's holding a lot of companies from moving forward. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So having said that, let's talk about closing that gap now. So the bigger question is, can ASEAN leadership evolve? That's one.
Yeah.
And the other thing we should ask ourselves is, how do we lead better without losing our cultural values? Which leads me into, how can leaders in ASEAN start shifting from command to control to a more, let's say, collaborative coaching style? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I love that question. If I may, leadership and the coaching, consultative, collaborative approach it takes time. Command and control, I say one, do one. But the consultative approach requires us to converse. So in the minds of a lot of Asian leaders, ASEAN leaders, this one fast, this one slow. But over the long term, this one creates a more holistic, a more inclusive group of employees that are willing to go the distance with you, as opposed with this one, you tell me one, but actually I think you tell me to do one, it's wrong. I don't believe in doing A. I believe in doing B. But because you said it, I'll just do A because that makes you happy, because it's a directive approach. So if I may, can ASEAN leaders change? They have to, but at different levels it is facing its resistance. I'll give you an example. If I am a first generation and I'm handing my huge manufacturing facility, my company, over to my second gen, my sons and my daughters, will there be pushback? We know that there is, because there's just a different mindset, the willingness to listen, the willingness to see. Are we going to do things differently? Is it going to be so different that I'm going to lose control? So those are some of the nuances that we're dealing with, but is it necessary? Absolutely, Gerald. Yeah.
It is necessary, but having said that, so we're wanting to change these things, but if you look at countries where with flatter hierarchies, these countries, and I might be generalizing that, most of these countries you look have a flourishing middle class. There's no gaps between there's no gap between the have and have-nots, and maybe that makes the process easier, right? And that also goes back to education levels. Are people reading? Are people on the same frequency?
Yeah.
So I think it's about, when you pull this back, you scale this back a little bit, it's about getting people on the same frequency. And is that doable without losing our cultural values here? We talk about cultural values all the time in ASEAN, in Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah, yeah.
So people worry about that, or is that a crutch we always, lean back on to say, we've got our cultural values, we might lose them?
Yeah. I think it's the latter. I think it's a crutch. Because if we talk about leadership progression as losing our culture, then my question is, what is culture? If culture is respect, let's say respect, for a certain way of doing things, and that means we can't progress, I will call out, what is respect? Because for so many of us, to preserve culture so that we continue to respect people in positions, our elders, etc., we can even just look at parenting. Just look at parenting. How parenting has changed. Is there respect? Yes. Is there respect for our 75-year-old folks? And is there respect for a new mom who has just turned 30? Is her child still respecting her? So respect, at least, is starting to change into different forms, where it's more consultative. The child is not just gonna, okay, you be home by 9. But they're gonna question, can I negotiate that? Can I this? Can I that? Why are these rules applicable to me? They wanna know the intention. So similar with leadership progression and challenging of the culture, I personally see it as a crutch. We're not losing respect as a value in our cultural heritage, and in parts of ASEAN there's so much of it. But it's being a more patient leader, holding a space, and that for me is a shift in culture. I really don't think that we're going to lose our culture in the midst of doing this.
Right. With the few minutes we have left, what would be your message, your call to policymakers and also young leaders within ASEAN who are now taking over generations of businesses and trying to move ASEAN into a different direction, trying to put together an ASEAN power grid, trying to put together an ASEAN economy as a bloc? What would be your message to them, and also your call to policymakers at this point within ASEAN?
I think my message is twofold, Gerald. This has been an amazing conversation, but it's twofold. Twofold, why? Because for some of us that are the ASEAN leaders, we are realizing that the youth need to step up. But as ASEAN leaders, it is imperative that we hold that space so that the youth can step up. And for the youth, my message for the youth is to lean in. Right now, ASEAN youth everywhere are facing their pushback. They are facing the embarrassments, or they're facing the rejections. They're facing all that. Yeah. But for me, continue to persist. Continue. Don't get demotivated. Continue to keep sharing and speaking up, because that's needed. The perspective need to flow upwards. So don't get demotivated. That's my message.
So if you're talking to the youth like that, they're speaking to a generation who always had to listen to directives. So there would be a bit of a problem there. So how do we now close that gap?
From the top, they have to hold the space. Don't shut them down. Oh my gosh, I've been there, done that. Don't shut it down. Don't shut it down. That's what I would say to the ASEAN leaders. ASEAN youth, meet them halfway. If your ASEAN leaders are asking you, hey, what do you think? Have something ready. What I think is ... Your ASEAN youth, they're great perspectives, but sometimes they're not communicating it while it makes sense. They say, I want to do this, I want to start this department, I want to do this energy, but no sensitivity on budget, no sensitivity on timeline. So even the youth, while my message is for you to lean in, communicate it so that it makes sense to the ASEAN leaders. You got to meet them halfway. They're not going to take a half-baked idea and say, that sounds awesome, just because you said it. No, you've got to be able to meet each other halfway by holding that space.
So one needs to learn how to meet halfway. One needs to learn how to hold space
Yes.
for that generation. Now, moving to policymakers, your call to them. We've got about a minute and a half. I think we can pull it to a minute and a half. Your call to policymakers with regards to shifting this mindset.
I think policymakers, I think one thing in particular, ASEAN is a bloc. Yeah, I personally see a more active approach with the ASEAN youth. Yeah, ASEAN youth now 40 and below. But if I may, to bring them all together so that there's a lot more collaboration, there's a lot more exchange. The youth are more willing to exchange and to understand, so that we can all be working together. Because if you look at the ASEAN youth, empower them today. Yeah, because they will be your future leaders in the next 5 to 10 years, while the ASEAN leaders do have to, at some point, retire. But this bunch, bring them together, activate them more. That's what I would suggest across the board for policymakers.
Right, on that note, thank you so much, Maresa. That's where we'll leave it for today on the Nation ASEAN Plus. We've unpacked how leadership styles, power distance and culture are shaping and how things work or don't across the ASEAN region, and why closing that gap matters not just for leaders but for us all. Remember, hold space for them, let them speak, hear them out, and in one word, how do you sum this up? Hear them out and
Collaborate and coaching culture.
yeah, collaborate, and don't forget the coaching culture. A big thank you to Maresa Ng for making this happen, and thank you so much for joining us right here on The Nation. Thank you, Maresa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Kunjungi program Madani Rakyat 2025 Sabah pada 9 hingga 11 Mei 2025 bertempat di dataran Majlis Perbandaran Tawau, Sabah. Pelbagai perkhidmatan kerajaan persekutuan